Shalom. Okay, we are going to study Sefer Bereshis now. This is Bereshis Yutes Pasuk Ches. So let's open up our Chumashim and look at Yutes Pasuk Ches. We're dealing with here is the story of Lot and Avram and the three angels. As we know, the story that Lot was had moved down to Sodom, and we're going to go into a little more of the story, into a little more of the reasoning why Lot had moved down to Sodom in a couple of minutes. But let's talk now just for a few minutes as to what the episode that our pasuk is dealing with immediately in right now in this case. The story is Lot has the three angels in his house, and his neighbors come and knock and say, send those three strangers and those three guests out of here. What do they want to do to them? They wanted to sodomize them. They wanted to rape them. Now, why would they want to do that? Well, that's the whole point of what Sodom was. It was a disgusting, evil place. And how do they treat guests? When anybody had guests over, so they would sodomize them. They would rape them. Well, Lot has this genius idea. Well, he says, well, Bikur Cholim is important. Achnasas Orchem, having guests over is important. That's what I learned from Avram, and these angels are my guests. I can't be as depraved as everybody else, so I'm not going to offer my guests up to be raped. That would be it's a horrific tragedy. So that's what Lot says. Well, Lot has this genius idea. Obviously, the crowd is not going to be placated by just a simple no. So what Lot says is, you know what? I'll give up my daughters. That way, they'll have somebody to rape. They'll have somebody to get out their sexual aggression against and their evil nature, but it won't be my guests. Okay, that's obviously a strange thing for Lot to say. I'm not sure what options he had, but I don't think that anybody would ever consider a good option being hand over your daughters instead of your guests. Okay, but that's what Lot says. And here we have a machlokas Rishonim as to what in the world Lot was doing. We have a debate between Rabbeinu Hananel and the Sforno. Rabbeinu Hananel says that Lot offers his daughters. That's the first Rishon that we're going to examine is Rabbeinu Hananel. He says that Lot offered his daughters not as a genuine offer, but as an offer he never thought anyone would take him up on. Like when someone says, oh, you know what? Oh, I can't handle this, shoot me. Right? So no one actually means, right, shoot me. They're just, they're expressing themselves in a strange way. Now, the question is, what's Rabbeinu Hananel telling us about Lot and about this episode? Well, I think that we could say is that Lot, here Rabbeinu Hananel is pointing out that Lot's mistake was not recognizing just how much weight his words could carry. He didn't realize that the people would actually and could actually take him up on this offer. This is something that we have to be very careful about, right? We have to be, and the concept here is that we have to understand the ramifications of our words. Right? The ramifications of our words are very, very serious. A lot of times we're too flippant with the words that we use. I'm guilty of this all the time. A lot of times we think that being sarcastic and being cute and being wise is funny. We don't realize how disturbing and how hurtful it could be to somebody else. Right? This is it's something that we all have to look in the mirror and say, okay, this is something important. But more so than just other people's feelings, just in terms of how it reflects upon ourselves and how our words really determine exactly who we are. Freud was very big on this in terms of that words are almost like a window into our subconscious, into what we're thinking. A lot of times when someone misspeaks, Freud was wont to say, that's really what we call nowadays a Freudian slip, really tells you what they're thinking deep inside. What Lot clearly, right, had this odd, strange mindset of not being careful and not being careful with his words at all, and really tells you a lot about him. And words really do say something about who you are and what you care about, right? This was Lot made a horrific mistake in saying this because it really went out of its way and showed exactly where Lot's thoughts were, and it showed how flippant Lot was with his thoughts and not recognizing the weight that they played. Now, what would cause Lot to make such a horrific mistake? What would cause Lot to go ahead and say that, okay, well, let me try to think this through. I don't know. Well, the answer is that Lot wasn't thinking things through. When Lot used these words, when Lot said this, he wasn't thinking things through at all. In fact, Lot was just acting and by instinct. Right? That's all it was a simply instinctual reaction was, okay, here we go. I've got to save my guests. How can I save my guests? Well, I'll give up my daughters. Right? When we slip with our words, so it's not that we accidentally say the wrong word. Right? That's not what's happening. What's happening is that we have an idea and we haven't fully followed through on our idea. We haven't fully thought through our idea. And since we haven't thought through the idea, we don't really recognize the ramifications of our words. So it's not that I accidentally slip and offend somebody. Right? It's not that I sit there with somebody, imagine somebody committed a horrific sin, right? And then while they're walking by, I mention that sin, right? That's not what we're talking about here. We're not talking about where that's not actually what even happens. What happens is that we don't think through our words. We're not thinking through our thoughts. So therefore, when I say something and I express myself, I haven't truly thought it through, and therefore something stupid comes out. That's the problem. It's not that I slipped up, it's that I wasn't thinking things through. And that's the concept that Rabbeinu Hananel here is expressing. He's saying that Lot was the type of person that just reacted. He wasn't the type of person that thought things through. That was what Lot's mistake was. Well, he didn't think things through. That was the problem. And that's what caused Lot to say something crazy like this. Lot's intentions might have been pure. He might have been thought, okay, I got to save my guests. What's the only way I could do it? Hand over my daughters. Now, anybody with putting four seconds worth of thought into that would have sat there and said, that's a horrible idea. Why would you even think of that? Offer money. Offer your house. Offer your possessions. Offer something. Don't offer your daughters. Don't offer another human being. That's crazy. Right? That's what we might have thought that Lot was saying here. But in the end result, we say that no, Lot had to think things through. Lot had to say, okay, that would be a horrible idea. Okay, that was Rabbeinu Hananel's idea. How did the Sforno understand this? So the Sforno had a different thought. The Sforno said that Lot's offering his daughters was real. This was different than this is very, very different than what Rabbeinu Hananel understood this as. It's just an expression. This was a real offer, and it shows just how disgusting and depraved Lot was. That he was so infused with promiscuity. Promiscuity is like illegal sexual actions, and it's like being wild and crazy and not really concerned about keeping your sexual life in a modest way. Right? He was so infused with promiscuity that he didn't think he was doing anything wrong by offering his daughters. He thought this is perfectly legitimate. That's what they're there for. They're there to be used for this type of a purpose. That was what was wrong with Lot. Now, in order to fully understand what he was talking about, what the Sforno was talking about in his understanding of Lot, we have to take a step back and ask ourselves this question. How did Lot end up in Sodom? If you remember, we learned that Lot and Avram had gotten into a disagreement. Right? We talked about the fact that they were both thinking about themselves and they weren't considering the other person's feelings and the other person's thoughts, and they got into a fight and they split up. Now Avram chose to go off to Elam Mamre, off by himself, off into the wilderness. Lot chose, of all the places to go, Sodom, the most depraved place on the planet. There was no place other than Sodom that he wanted to go to. It's an unbelievable thing if you think about it, right? This is what Lot had in mind. This is what he was thinking, was that I'll go off to Sodom. What an incredible thought! Why would anyone do this? This would be going to Sin City. That's where he was going. Sin City. That's my direction. That's what I want to go to. And Lot was making a choice. It was a thought-out choice. It was a choice that I'm going to go to a place where sin is not only accepted, it's encouraged. Not only is it encouraged, it's obligatory. That's the place that I want to go to. And that tells us a lot about what Lot's priorities were. Right? What we understand as human beings is that perfection of ourselves, how we better ourselves, we'll never be perfect. Let's put it out there. We will die at 120 years old and we will not be perfect individuals. That's a fact. We would like to deny it. We'd like to say that we would be perfect, but we're not going to be perfect. That's just a fact of life. We will not be perfect individuals. But hopefully, if we strive hard enough, we'll be a lot better than when we started. How do we get there? So it's very simple. We have two drives within us. We have an instinctual drive, and we have an intellectual drive. The more often we make decisions based on our intellect, the greater of a chance we have of perfecting ourselves. So in every case that we have where we decide what to do and what not to do, the question comes down to intellect versus instinct. Those are the questions that we deal with. Those are our issues. Intellect versus instinct. Do I follow my drive? Do I follow my desires? Or do I take a step back and say, you know what? There's definitely something better I could be doing here. What could I be doing? I could be following what's correct, what the right thing to do is. And that helps me. That's my intellect working, not just my instinct. Perfection of character is where I follow my intellect and not my instincts. That's how I get better. That's how I become a better person. What Lot was doing was, Lot made a choice. He was with Avram. For years he was with Avram, and all Avram taught was the perfection of one's intellect. That's exactly what his whole idea and his whole premise was of life, was one has to perfect themselves. They have to become better people. They have to follow their intellect and not their instincts. Lot makes a choice. He says when he moves to Sodom, he doesn't just say, I'm leaving Avram, I'm leaving that entire way of life. I am moving to Sin City. That's where I'm going, Sodom, where sodomy is practiced and sexual deprivation is practiced, and they don't honor their guests and they don't do anything proper. Whatever you want to do, that's what you get to do. Morals, values, ethics play absolutely no role whatsoever in a person's life in Sodom. That's what he was aiming for. Now, when he's aiming for that, now you got a problem, right? Now you have a bona fide issue. How was Lot going to go ahead and live like this? Well, it got to him. It got to him. It got to him to such a point where he became one of the Sodomites. He became one of these people. And when they came and knocking on the door and said, "Hey, we're taking your guests," Lot was so insensitive to, I shouldn't say insensitive, he was so desensitized to sexual morale and how one should lead their lives, he even offered his daughters. It's one thing if you visit prostitutes and you're sexually active to a wild extent past the norms, and you involve yourself in the deepest sexual sins that one could imagine, where your whole life is based around sexual desire. Okay, that's one level of sin. That's one level of imperfection. That's one level of where a person is just totally become an animal. But to the extent where Lot had put himself such into this society so much, had such an influence on him, he couldn't even protect his own daughters. His own daughters from this sexual depravity. He couldn't even see it in his own mind how bad this was. That's where the Sforno says this comment is coming to show you just how bad, if you surround yourself with this stuff, just how bad and how much of an influence it can have on you. If you remember, the Rambam had talked about moving to a place where you're surrounded by those that are striving to perfect themselves on good influences, and how bad evil influences are for a person. The debate between the Rabbeinu Hananel and the Sforno, Rabbeinu Hananel is talking about the concept of thinking things through, of understanding the weight of your words. The Sforno is understanding that this is all about the perfection of character, perfection of a person. That's where the Sforno sees this. And perfection comes with channeling one's instinctual drives and not acting by way of their instincts, but acting by way of their intellect. That's the idea. Hope you understood it. If not, there's always the rewind button. Shalom.